Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Later in the hour, we'll learn how the practice of breathing can inspire socially conscious art, and in particular through a new exhibition at the Contemporary Art Museum. But first, across the country, undergrad and graduate students are taking to campus to protest the ongoing war in Gaza. As these students call upon their universities to take a stance on the 7-month-long war, institutional response has varied, and much of it has involved physical confrontations with police. Last month at Washington University, law enforcement officers from several local police departments arrested over 100 people who attempted to set up a Gaza solidarity encampment on campus grounds. The university has issued temporary suspensions to students as well as to faculty and staff since then. It has also been facing internal and external backlash for its handling of the protest and its treatment of protest participants. Andrew De Las Alas has first-hand knowledge of this situation. He's a third-year undergrad at WashU and among those who were arrested and temporarily suspended for his involvement with the April 27th campus protest. And he joins us to talk with us about that. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
We also have another guest, Michael Allen, architectural and cultural historian who is senior lecturer at Washington University and, like Andrew, was arrested and suspended after participating in last month's protest on campus. Michael, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Let's talk first about the reasons for the protest. Andrew, why did you and other students decide to organize this protest?
So this protest was one of many other actions that have been taken over the past few months. We were particularly driven to mobilize because of the university's continued relationship with Boeing. Boeing has documented bombs and other munitions that are sent over to the Israeli government. You can find fragments of those same bombs that are actually made in St. Louis in the remnants of civilian homes in central Gaza. So this, the encampment, like many other walkouts, protests, art build-ins, and even some student government actions, were a continuation of student organizers to call on the university to divest from Boeing.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you have any concerns at all about how WashU might respond to the protest? And if so, how did you and your fellow student organizers kind of talk through or approach those concerns beforehand?
So, as we've seen at many other institutions, there's always a possibility of a police response. So we had folks that were ready for, in the case of arrests, ready to make sure that we had transportation lined up and jail support ready. So while we were expecting a police response or potential police intimidation, we didn't expect this level of violence.
Mm-hmm. Michael, why did you decide to join the protest on April 27th?
Yes, well, I stand in support of the student demands that were issued. I stand in support of Palestinian liberation. I've been involved in activism in recent months on campus, but after the really horrendous and repressive treatment of the students who protested at Graham Chapel on April 13th, I thought it was imperative that more faculty members be present on April 27th in the event that the university would use police force on its own students, which sadly it did that day.
Mm-hmm. And it was police force that came not only from the campus police, but also from surrounding municipalities, correct?
That's correct, although most of the arrests were directed and carried out by the Washington University Police Department. So the other departments were present, but let's be clear, Washington University's own police really were in charge and led the first round of the assault on the encampment.
Now, there were some people at the protest who did not have any direct affiliation with WashU at all. Ali Yuchitel, a law student at St. Louis University, attended and was arrested. And she said that she was compelled to join because of her faith.
Jewish people have a really long history of involvement in social justice and liberation movements. And in fact, the rabbi that married my parents and performed my naming ceremony has been arrested multiple times while engaging in acts of civil disobedience, once while protesting police brutality in Ferguson, and then another time while protesting Trump's Muslim ban. And I see myself right now as continuing that long tradition of civil disobedience and involvement in social justice movements. And I also see it as my obligation as somebody that a genocide is being committed in the name of my religion, to be a Jew of conscience and speak out.
SLU undergraduate Nadia Abu Saud is another non-Washington University student who was at the protest at WashU on April 27th, and she said that she's been inspired to organize pro-Palestine actions on her own campus because of the bravery of student protesters all around the country.
I grew up learning about my history and learning about my people, my family. My dad did a very good job of educating, and not many people around me ever recognized Palestine. So seeing all these students worldwide come together for one specific cause, for a ceasefire and an end to the genocide of my people finally, it's been something beautiful to see. On the other hand, everyone being punished for it is exactly how I thought it would go.
Michael, did you expect WashU to respond in the way that it did and to punish protesters in the way that Nadia just described?
No, it's absolutely antithetical to the values we espouse as an institution. Contrary to what university leaders said in a faculty senate meeting recently, it was consistently peaceful. There was no surrounding of the library and blocking of exits. This was in the least disruptive location possible. The students really tried to minimize the impact of what they were doing on other people trying to use the campus. I thought they did a really great job of accommodating.
Mm-hmm. You were filming police officers who were forcefully arresting SIUE professor Steve Tamari. When you yourself were arrested, Michael, you've been at protests in the past. I mean, what was the experience like for you? I mean, were you at all prepared for what happened?
I think there's always a risk when you are filming police brutality that you will get arrested by the police. They don't like that. What in this case is interesting is WashU's professed civic virtues contrasting with the actions of their own employees, their police. I got arrested within 3 minutes of the start of the police assault on the encampment. I didn't last very long. They were targeting people who were filming. So I wasn't super surprised that I'd get swept up. But I was also never in the encampment, and I was about 200 feet from the encampment when I got arrested. So literally not even in any position to interfere with arrests or impact police actions. I was simply documenting.
Mm-hmm. Now, Andrew, you spent a couple hours at the St. Louis County Jail before being released. What was going through your mind during that time?
Well, I think what initially stood out to me was I actually interned with the public defender's office last summer, and I was taken to the same building that I was working towards values of criminal justice. And I was particularly driven towards that because of a lot of the lessons I've learned in the classroom and through extracurriculars at WashU. But I was particularly inspired, honestly, by the kinds of people that I was able to meet and the conversations that I was having. And I think WashU, other institutions across the country, they want people to be intimidated. They want people to back down from this kind of activism. But I think in a way this was nourishing. Mm-hmm. And don't get me wrong, I was afraid for my academic future. I was afraid for really what would happen. I think I was held for approximately 6 hours. But then at the end, I come out and I'm greeted by a circle of dozens of friends and other folks who have been organizing for the past few months. And that was very nourishing and inspiring to see.
We're talking about the Washington University protest on campus on April 27th and its aftermath. Joining me in studio now is Andrew de las Alas, who's a third-year undergraduate student at Washington University, and Michael Allen, who is a senior lecturer at the university. Let's talk more about the demands made at the protest. And students across the country are calling on universities to disclose and divest. What does this mean, Andrew?
Well, to tackle them one at a time, disclosure calls on any institution, academic or not, to be transparent with their financial investments. That's either direct ones and indirect ones. In the case of WashU, we know that their endowment, which is the money that they take in from donors, from alumni, for example, and that money is used to invest in other organizations across the world. What student organizers and what community members are calling for is for more transparency in that. Additionally, the divestment part would be, we know that the university has maintained a relationship with Boeing, and we believe that to be contrary to the university's mission, contrary to our own moral judgments and values, and a lot of the lessons that we're learning in the classroom. So we're calling on the university to divest from Boeing specifically for their role in arming the genocide.
Michael, from your perspective, I mean, you've stated already that you support these student demands. Why do you think that they are important? And how, especially from the perspective of someone who's working with the institution, what would divestment potentially look like at Washington University?
Right. Well, that question would only be answerable if we had a look at the portfolio. We don't even know what our holdings there are. But I think the importance and urgency here is we have a world torn apart right now. We have a historic support for Palestinian liberation. We also have people, afraid of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism that have kind of followed. The agenda of divestment and the agenda of these demands provides the university a place to actually bring people back together, to create action steps that might start healing some of the rifts we've seen on campus and across the nation. There could be negotiation. Andrew Martin and Provost Wendland were not seen on April 27th. The only administrators there were talking to the police, not to the students. And I think that's a real low day for the institution, a dark day, to quote Chancellor Martin, but not for the same reasons he thinks.
Right. No, the night of the protest, Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs, Ana Gonzalez, sent a campus-wide email. She wrote, quote, "It quickly became clear through the words and actions of this group that they did not have good intentions on our campus. We also felt strongly that this demonstration had the potential to get out of control and become dangerous." Unquote. Now, when WashU senior Emmett Campbell read that email, he said he felt the university was mischaracterizing the protest. Campbell co-founded Jewish Students for Palestine last semester as a way to express his anti-Zionist beliefs.
I am a Jewish student, and my safety does not feel threatened by the protests that are going on in support of what is happening in Gaza. My Jewish peers who were at the protest and who got arrested at the protest, I think they agree with me. The idea that these protests are threatening to Jewish students, I think, is on its face just incorrect. I think when you go to these protests and you realize the population of Jewish students who are there saying the same chants and the same things that every other protester is doing, I think that that's kind of the clearest point. The threat isn't against Jewish students, it's against the Israeli government.
Andrew, what do you think hearing what Emmett has said?
Similar to what Emmett said, I think that the university is deliberately mischaracterizing these protests. I think this is a similar kind of discourse that you see other institutions wield against protests that are calling for racial justice, calling for the betterment of Black and brown people. And they present a false dichotomy where the safety of one group, in this case Jewish students, is placed against Palestinian liberation or even Palestinian student safety. And I think that's a false dichotomy. It's a disingenuous place to start. because the violence that is being enacted is against Jewish students. It was, like Emmett said, it is the Jewish organizers who are standing in the line, who are offering bottles of water, and who are playing with the kids right before the police swept the camp. And for the university to go on and characterize these the arrests as peaceful is just a blatant lie and honestly reprehensible.
Mm-hmm. Now, both you, Andrew, and Michael have been temporarily suspended. Michael, how has that affected your duties as a professor?
Well, I think a better question is, how has this affected many students and faculty members who aren't me? My students are suffering more than I am because they have to submit final work through intermediaries to somebody who's still going to grade that work, and they can't get feedback. I can't ask them questions about their work. That really puts their academic success at risk, and I think it's really shameful the university would take these actions at the very end of the semester.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, suspensions, this one is temporary. Suspensions have very serious repercussions, and WashU is withholding a degree from at least one student who is in the graduate school of public health. How has this suspension impacted you and your peers?
In my case, I'm very fortunate to live off campus and to not be reliant on a university meal plan or be employed by the university. But I know that's not a reality that all students can have. I know people that were evicted from their housing with about 8 hours of notice. And first off, for the university to have some kind of policy like that in place is, again, disgusting. And it really boggles my mind to think about what kind of decision-making processes from any administrator thought that this was an acceptable way and an acceptable course of action.
Mm-hmm. Now, Andrew, you'll be staying with us. Michael, I'd like to give this last question to you. We are here at the end of the semester. Another school year is going to be starting just in a few months from now. What would be your best hope for the outcome of everything that has happened after this April 27th protest and what is going on right now?
Well, I think the university should immediately cease all of the material penalties. So don't charge people. We are not charged yet with trespassing. There's only a complaint. They can tell St. Louis County tomorrow, we're not moving forward, and drop that. They can release the suspensions of everyone. And then talk about what happened. And that's going to have to happen at each department level because a lot of people are now culpable in carrying out this plan. And it's incredibly damaging. And if this kind of abuse of faculty and students happens quietly and is just brushed under the rug, Washington University becomes a really toxic, dysfunctional family. Mm-hmm. These things need to be aired and acknowledged so we can heal.
We need to take a quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue this conversation. Michael Allen, Senior Lecturer at Washington University, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Concerning the arrests, Washington University spokeswoman Julie Hale-Fleury told us, quote, "We didn't want to have to arrest anyone. After being told multiple times that they must leave or they would be arrested, the individuals who chose to stay locked arms and refused to move. Police had to physically remove them. Some chose to resist arrest." End quote. Fleury said no one was targeted for filming or for doing anything other than violating WashU policies and refusing to leave. We'll be back in just a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Let's return to our conversation about the Washington University campus protest on April 27th and the arrests and suspensions that have occurred in the aftermath of that event. Before the break, we spoke with architectural and cultural historian and Washington University senior lecturer Michael Allen. He participated in the anti-war protest that took place on the campus on April 27th and is among those who were arrested by police and suspended by the university. Andrew de las Alas, a WashU junior who was also arrested at that protest and temporarily suspended by the school, remains with us. We now have a different professor from Washington University joining our conversation with another perspective. That's Shanti Parikh, chair of the African and African American Studies Department and professor of anthropology at Washington University. Shanti, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Thank you.
So Shanti, how have these last few weeks been for faculty like you?
It has been very difficult to watch our students who we have nurtured and been with in the classroom and out of the classroom go through this. Not only students who were arrested, but their friends. It has really traveled throughout campus as an infection. People are fearful, but currently faculty are disappointed, but I think we feel inspired by how many like-minded faculty there are. I think we don't recognize the university. It's a long way from the Dean McLeod's Danforth campus, where the slogan was every student by name and story, to now what we're seeing, a university that is being used as a national example in different publications of higher education as an example of a botched handling and then a doubling down of their decisions.
Shanti, you are referring to administrators from a time I don't recognize. This was before I came to St. Louis, and also to sort of a sensibility that is one that I'm not familiar with. Why do you think, as someone who's been with this institution for as long as you have, that WashU has responded in the way that it has?
You know, I was a product when I was in college. It was during the anti-apartheid movement. And we did encampments, we did protests, we called for divestments. I think what's happening now between Israel and Palestine and Gaza is a very different political situation within the United States. I think the administration is being heavy-handed so that they can show that they are supportive of Israel. And I think what they don't realize is that there is common ground and there is a way in which we can engage our students to understand their perspective, but also an opportunity to educate people.
Now, Shanti, you helped to garner signatures from various departments asking the administration to permit suspended students to walk the stage this month if they were graduating. How else are faculty members trying to support students?
Right, on multiple levels. I think we are trying to understand what their day-to-day needs are. Of the 23 students who were suspended, some of them were thrown out of university housing. Their meal points were stopped. So I think some of it is just basic needs: housing, food, money, but also emotional support for them and their friends and community. Students are afraid, but not of student protesters, but of the administration. And so I think we're just trying to be there for students, both meet their daily needs, but we're also trying to help with some longer term change. We have 3 points. We definitely are asking the university to reverse the suspensions. We would like the university to form a committee to see what happened so that this doesn't happen again. So I think this is sort of like a process question. And then we would also like to look at our policy of our disruption and demonstration policy and say, where is it failing our students? And finally, get into a conversation with students and with faculty about what they expect from the university when it comes to addressing the devastation that they are seeing on the media cycle day in and day out.
Now, in an email following the arrests, Chancellor Martin wrote that WashU fully supports free expression. And he said, quote, "Our campus is a place for our community to advocate and debate, but to be clear, our expectation is that members of our community can protest and express their strongly held views with signs, chants, and speeches, so long as they don't resort to actions that cause harm," end quote. Andrew, you took a free expression class with Chancellor Martin as the professor. What do you make of his statement about free speech and protests?
When I took the Chancellor's class on free speech, he really emphasized these ideas of First Amendment doctrine and how they can also differ from private institution to a public institution. That said, the language that the Chancellor is using and many of the existing policies, such as the demonstration and disruptions policy, the conduct policy, these rely on ambiguous language that the Dean of Conduct has expressly said is ambiguous, so that way, at least in the words of the administrators, can kind of tackle a multitude of different issues. But from the student organizer perspective, it sounds like it is also attempting to chill free expression on campus. So when people do want to hold the institution accountable, which to me is a fundamental part of free expression and free speech, the response wasn't like the Chancellor said in his free speech class and in those emails, to sit down and have discourse, have some kind of dialogue. It was for administrators to sit behind police lines, yards behind, sitting, reclining in a yard chair, and refuse to talk not just with students, but also Alderwomen Megan Green and Alicia Saunier, as well as presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein. So if the university is going to come out in official communications and say, we advance free speech and communication, I think what we saw on 427 was the reality of how they will treat speech that they just don't like.
Shanti, we talked earlier about consequences that students and faculty faced. And Andrew, what you're bringing up about what people are observing from outside brings up this question of consequences for Washington University as an institution. Shanti, do you think that there will be any for WashU because of the way it handled the April 27th protest?
Oh, definitely. One of our strategic aims in the university is about for St. Louis, with St. Louis. I think this has damaged our reputation in the community. It's damaged our reputation with some of the higher ed kind of bodies. So many of us, particularly in Black Studies, we come from a history of partnering with the community. Many of us know that there was already suspicion and a bit of distrust with the community. This is just setting it back. And the number one example is not only the militarized police force against our students and community members, but the kind of weaponizing of the term community members. So it's now that students, but they'll say they were, but it was also community members. So it's a shift from community members as somebody who were going to impact their lives to community members who are infecting the university. So I think it's definitely compared to SLU, compared to SIUE, our approach has definitely been much more heavy-handed. People see it as intimidation tactics to silence students. I mean, that's what I'm hearing from my students, is that these are tactics to silence them.
So I want to direct the last question here to you, Andrew. The semester is now nearly over. Over the summer, what will you be doing, and what is it that you are hoping to see when you come back to Washington University to start your senior year in August?
First off, I think what I would want to see is not just on my campus, but internationally, a recognition of what is happening in Gaza as a genocide, and particularly as bipartisan actors double down on this incredibly violent and genocidal rhetoric that folds in belittling protesters and belittling a strong history of student activism. First, I want the Palestinian people to still be alive, to still exist. because we know that there are, in addition to the military violence, there are outbreaks of diseases. There is an imminent risk of starvation in the next few months. So as students go home for the summer, I hope that they return back to whatever city they're going to, and they continue that activism. I know I will be looking for outlets when I'm working over the summer myself, but continuing back onto campus, I hope to see a continuance of this kind of momentum against war profiteers. I see there's really no place that any kind of educational institution has in reaping the benefits of Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, or other kinds of organizations that are profiting off the suffering of many of the families and the home countries of their students. So I hope to see a continuance of that momentum so that way we can continue to hold these institutions accountable.
Andrew De Las Alas is a Washington University junior who was arrested at the protest on WashU's campus on April 27th. He is temporarily suspended for now, and we thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And Shanti Parikh, chair of the African and African American Studies Department and professor of anthropology at Washington University.
Thank you.
We reached out to Washington University in response to Shanti Parikh's assertion that WashU administrators are seeking to show their support for Israel. A spokeswoman, Julie Hill-Fleury, said that the university has not taken a position on the conflict in the Middle East. Further, she noted that the university has said numerous times since October 7th that, quote, these events are devastating and heartbreaking, end quote. In response to Andrew De Las Alas's point about ambiguous student conduct policies, Fleury said setting up unapproved tents on campus is not an ambiguous policy. She went on to say that WashU fully supports free expression and peaceful protest, but that it will, quote, not tolerate behavior that causes harm to our community, end quote, and that no one is chilling free expression, noting that there have been at least 30 student-led protests on the campus during this academic year, with all but 3 of them being peaceful and following university policies. She said the protest on April 27th included, quote, intentional yelling of intifada and aggressive chanting at the front door of the library where many students were studying for finals. Earlier today, we extended an open invitation to Chancellor Andrew Martin to join us on this show.
This episode was produced by Adla Kuziz and engineered by Maya Norfleet.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.